recorded? No, not seen any. And Chair's remarks. Now, you'll recall from the first meeting back in July that we needed to, appoint a vice chair at this meeting. So my suggestion would be that we see Councillor Lau would like to be vice chair for this committee. You've got a huge experience in transport matters. So do I have an agreement that Councillor Lau is vice chair for this year? Thank you. So, item 4 then, minutes of the meeting of the 14th of July. Now, these went to Overview and Scrutiny Committee on the 5th of September and were agreed, as there are 4 of us, I think, who sit on that committee. So, in terms of accuracy, they were agreed. But I will take any matters arising. So, matters arising from page 1, page 2, page 3. So I have a matter arising on page 3, item 60, progress report on transport governance review. We had a presentation by Scottish Mystery to the meeting, and also presentations from various other people, including Jodie Townsend, who is leading on the transport governance review. Now, Jodie has sent me some questions through as chair, which I will be responding to, and hope to get those off to him early next week, just for him to add that into the mix of the governance review, in order for him to be able to report back. So those will be going forward next week. And anything on page 4? No? Okay, thank you very much for that. And we move on then to item number 6. Now, you remember that Mr. Weller came and spoke to us at last committee and raised some very specific questions for response by the CA. A response has gone out, and I think you will all have seen that in your packs. So we've got a report back on that. The process for this morning will be that officers will give a report. Members will have the opportunity then to ask any further questions, and then Mr. Weller will have no more than 2 minutes at the end of that presentation to respond to the issues raised by officers. So over to yourself, Carl.
Yes, good morning everyone. For those that haven't met me before, my name is Carl Beaton. I'm Head of Transport Strategy and Planning. So we'll do a few slides just to summarise the response that we published that's in the agenda pack. So in essence, the question that was asked is about whether the Wednesbury-Briley Hill Metro line, instead of going off the old railway alignment into the waterfront, Merry Hill and Briley Hill, could continue onto the railway line, with a suggestion that it would save quite a bit of money, up to £100 million, and would enable some other integration with things like Stourbridge Junction. So a little bit of background first on Wednesbury-Briley Hill extension. So this is a project that I think is much needed and has been talked about and planned for a very long time. So it's been in our transport strategies for many years, and is really seen as one of the key transport link for the Black Country and the West Midlands. And many of our planning documents, so Black Country Joint Core Strategy, Briley Hill Area Action Plan, include this link in it, and it's kind of fundamental to how we think that growth will happen and how people will move around. And was included in Movement for Growth, our current local transport plan, and there's a map showing the alignment there. So a well-established, well-understood project with I think lots of support. Where we got to enable that to happen, for projects like tram schemes, you need something called a Transport and Work Act order. So this is the powers to enable you to build it, and this is a lengthy and long process and goes through significant amount of scrutiny. And that happened for this project in 2005, so a few years ago now, and we got approval from Secretary of State to allow us to build it. And it allows you to build essentially the route you've proposed. So there's not too much you can't move too much off the alignment that you've proposed. So the planning powers are for the route and for the scheme that we've got. Following that, bit of a period of time, but we managed to secure a significant amount of funding through both our Devo deal and Transforming Cities Fund. And now, essentially, as many of you will know, we're building the project and construction is underway, in particular in Dudley. So suggested alternative routes. So our current route at this end of the metro line is shown in orange on the screen there. An alternative route, which would stay on the old railway alignment, is shown in blue broadly. So that would give you an idea of the kind of differences in the two proposals. So essentially what that might mean is we wouldn't serve Merry Hill. So Merry Hill, as many people know, very, very large shopping centre, and really a regional asset, I would suggest, for the Black Country and beyond. And as some of the numbers on the table there show, this is the patronage numbers that come out of our transport forecasting. Essentially, the stop at Merry Hill would be the second most used stop after Dudley Town Centre. We also have good patronage at the Briley Hill stop and at the waterfront, and we expect the waterfront is one where it would grow in the future. So essentially, the kind of core response to the proposal put forward is we don't think an alignment stayed on the former railway line would serve as many people as we would like it to. And I suppose the question is, would that meet the core objectives of the project? So we put some of the core objectives of the project up here, most of them being things about improving accessibility to major employment and residential sites. So a major employment site, Merry Hill, I think most people would agree would fall under that category of a major employment site. Areas of opportunity, so some of those are around the waterfront as well, an area with land use changes is taking place. Better access to a wider workforce, again, we think that the route as it stands would do that, and encouraging shift from car. So again, going to a place, a very large trip attractor, a trip generator at Merry Hill, we think would be important if we wanted to do that. And that's obviously important for our carbon agenda, but also for decongestion, air quality, and many other things. So in summary, I think where we get to, whilst we probably would agree actually that it would save a significant amount of money, there are a lot of structures required to get into Merry Hill. Whilst it would save money, it wouldn't necessarily have a better business case. The benefits and patronage would likely be lower on the basis that less people would want to use the route, as it doesn't go essentially where we think the bulk of demand is needed. Secondly, if we did choose to do an alternative route and it fell outside the lines of deviation in the Transport and Work Act order, we would have to restart that process. That is a lengthy, expensive process, and may well mean further delays, essentially. So that's where we got to. Hope that is kind of short, concise and clear, and yep, happy to take any questions from around the room.
Thank you very much for that. So I'll open it up to questions from members if you've got any questions that you want to raise of the, excuse me, the officer's presentation. Yep.
So I'm not sure if I know the blue line you said, is that in use at the moment?
No, that section isn't currently. No, part of most of the metro, Wednesbury-Briley Hill metro route is on a disused railway line that's no longer in operation. There is some operation at the very southern end of the line related to
that closed.
1990. It was a while ago. Yeah, it was a very long time ago. It was.
Did you actually did a business case there? Now, if it wasn't used, how much that would be used?
Yes, so as part of the Transport and Work Act order process, everything is looked at. Should it be a bus? Should it be a tram? Should it be rail? Yeah. And all of those issues have been addressed, and the metro was found to be, in terms of meeting those objectives, the preferred project.
Okay, it's like for like, basically the number of passengers if that route was used. Ignore everything else, just purely on passengers.
Yeah.
What is likely?
The number of passengers on opening up the former railway line was significantly lower. Yeah, the stops are further apart. Generally, for rail, frequency also tends to be lower, and essentially doesn't take you directly into the locations where people wanted to go. In Dudley, you would go through a tunnel under the town centre, you wouldn't go into the town centre, which is a very similar comparison really. So again, the metro lets you come into the town centre at Dudley, come into Merry Hill at this end of the route, and then gets much closer to the facilities that we think passengers want to get to.
Really sorry, I want to ask further question. you said the frequency, I believe.
Yeah.
But if the frequency was same as metro, then numbers.
I would imagine we didn't do, I don't think there was a piece of work done that did that. I'd imagine it would be lower again just because of the stop locations not being as close to the major trip generators.
You couldn't make any other provisions for, say, where is in the tunnel, somehow Scrutiny can be installed so people can use that.
I'm sure that there's lots of clever engineers, because I'm sure they would be able to think of something. But if you had stops at each end of the tunnel, which is probably more likely, again, you would be further away from things like Dudley Town Centre. You wouldn't be close again to the main trip generators.
The frequency on a rail line as well would also have to take in the wider rail network and the pathways that the trains are running on. So accessing that rail line from the wider rail network would be you'd have to, there'll be some constraints around the pathways from the sort of feeding in railway lines as well. So I don't think you'd get the same level of frequency. So the tram at its highest frequency is every 6 minutes. That's where it should be. That's where we're trying to get back to. I don't think you'd get a train every 6 minutes on this line because of the wider network and the implications of that as well. I think that answers that frequency question.
I asked that question because I thought that line is not in use. That's the reason.
Yeah, but you'd still that line would still have to
it
connect
has
to the
to-
wider rail network in order for trains to run on
Yeah,
it.
it would need to interface somewhere with the wider rail network.
Mm.
You also wouldn't get the interface with Metro Line 1, which is another really important point. So with a Metro route, you can get on at Briley Hill or Merry Hill and either go to Wolverhampton or West Brom or Birmingham in a way you wouldn't necessarily be able to with a rail line. And this rail line that used to go all the way up to Derby, essentially. So you'd be going up towards Walsall. So it would offer different connections and would do it.
That's fine going to Warsaw. We
Yeah.
wanted to Warsaw.
I think there definitely is some benefits if you could do something that could link this. So ultimately a vision with Wednesbury in the middle and Walsall and then Briley Hill and then line 1 going across between Birmingham, West Brom and Wolverhampton would be ideal. But yeah, so the different modes have different constraints, and again, they were all looked at in lots of detail to get the Transport and Work Act order approval. It's quite legalistic, quite lengthy, lots of consultation, and ultimately goes through the Secretary of State, who's got a team of economists in Department for Transport looking at all these proposals. So we're confident that this was the preferred option.
I was just asking because the cost would be substantially less because the structure is already there, so you just need to review. So,
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't. There would still be some costs because you'd have to bring back into use infrastructure that may require quite a bit of work.
But you don't have to buy any CPUs or anything.
You'd still have to negotiate with Network Rail, who
yes.
own, and they would probably want, about how they would do that, and then the costs of bringing that older infrastructure that's probably quite dilapidated now back into use would have to conform to all the new standards around design and safety, etc. And there would be quite a considerable cost to that as well as the metro.
As long as it's considered, that's fine.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
And just in terms of CPAs and planning powers, we have all of those for the existing route. So they are all in place, and
I'll think so. I'm just saying that.
No, it's
like
good.
like.
They're good questions. They're good questions to ask, and it is the job of transport planners to try and. I don't mind if it's a tram or a train or a bike, or it just needs to be the best option for the residents.
I have to ask. That's why I'm there. Thank you. Thank you.
That's the waters.
I assume that the route is actually going to use existing roads rather than actually building new roads, and will this mean that there'll actually be buildings have to be knocked down or anything to actually accommodate the tram route?
So the most of the route is on that former railway line, and you can see the orange bit where it comes off. It has some interaction with roads, but it's essentially a segregated mode. And Dudley Town Centre, again, it moves through the town centre on some of the existing highways there. So there is limited interaction with existing highways. One of the benefits of the route is it on that on that segregated alignment that used to be the old railway line. There are some structures needed. There are lots of canals. There's lots of things to navigate to get into where people want to get to in the centre of Merry Hill. But the majority of the route is on that former railway line.
Yeah, good.
Councillor Sims.
Good morning. Forgive me if these have already been answered because I'm my second meeting. I actually live right in the middle of all this, what's going on between, we live in Tipton, but I'm in Wednesbury as well. So I know there's lots and lots of work going on from the Wednesbury line to Dudley, which is brilliant. What's going to happen if the route does differ? What's going to happen with all the works that have already been done in Dudley, or will they still be used?
So all the works that are currently under construction, the intention is to open that network to Dudley and then on to Briley Hill as well. So that is what we're doing. So we're committed to that, as we've taken that through the Combined Authority Board as well at the last meeting. So that will, as Carl set out, if we were to consider the alternative, there would be a lot of work that would need to be done. You would need new statutory powers to introduce something, and it would take a large number of years, as well as costs, to get to a position where we would agree to any intervention on the blue line. That would not remove us from delivering what we're currently in delivery. We've got the funding to do that through to Dudley, and that construction work is ongoing.
Okay, and another thing as well, whereabouts? You say it's going to go underground under a tunnel. Where would that be?
That was the rail line.
Yes, so our proposal doesn't, so there is a tunnel that goes under Dudley for the rail alignment. We go off, we don't go and use that, we go into the centre again, going into where people want to get to, essentially in the centre of Dudley town centre. So we're not proposing to use the tunnel. We have previously looked at all of those things because it is cheaper, and the economics of less people wanting to use it and having to work farther mean even it's more expensive to go on street into the centres. The benefits are greater than the costs.
And one last thing, in and around Tipton Mall, I think it would be Station Road, or where you've got Dudley Port Station, eye level, we're using the low level. I know there's car parking facilities there. There's major issues in Tipton at the moment with car parking and with the railway. We've raised it many, many times in our general meetings because of the parking. I really don't think the parking was thought through that well to please the residents, because there's going to be a lot of on-road parking. The residents are going to be up in arms. Well, we've already had that meeting with them, and as there been many compulsory purchase orders of the houses near our Station Road. I know there's 5 or 6 houses there. A couple of years ago, they was put under a possible compulsory purchase order, but I'm not sure whether that has materialised or not.
So that there are some compulsory purchase orders and voluntary purchases that have been made to construct the whole length of the tram. I haven't got the full list, so I happily take that question offline, specifically to answer the question about Station Road, whether or not we compulsory purchased any properties there, because it may be associated with another project.
Yeah.
And on the Tipton, are you talking about Tipton railway station or
Dudley Port?
Dudley Port.
Dudley Port. You've got the eye level Dudley Port, and you've got this. I don't know if it's going to be called Dudley Port underneath.
So there are in other proposals that we're working through around Dudley Port station. We've got some hypothecated gain, I think it's called, funding with Network Rail, and there are some options being looked at about how we can improve Dudley Port station and the facilities there as well. And I think if that's a specific question that you've got around that, we can probably bring you up to speed with what that is. That's in its very early stages, but certainly knowing now that that's a specific issue for Sandwell, I think we'll...
It is. I mean, I'm not sure whether it's red routed or yellow lines there, to be honest with you, off the top of my head. But there's issues now, and it's not even open. There's issues with just the train.
Yeah. So any train station, obviously we want to encourage people to get to train stations, local people walking, cycling, and by car, but some people will go a little bit further. Also, we need to work out how the bus connects to those stations as well. Car parking does need to be provided, but it needs to be incentivised to use some of the other modes as well. And if we are looking at some of those things, we normally would work with the local authority to look at what's the impact outside of that area and what sort of traffic regulation orders or traffic management do we need to protect local properties, local businesses as well from indiscriminate parking, so that we can, you know, incentivise people to travel to that station.
There's a lot of school. My fear is there's a lot of school children that uses that route. I've drove down there many days regularly each week, and the way the cars park is because they're just going to jump on the train, and I'm just fearful that obviously if the tram's there, the train users will still be doing that, but then the people during the daytime who want to go shopping or just do whatever they've got to do, you know, it's going to be a lot of restrictions.
Okay, well, I can take that offline and just look at what those proposals are. But there's a big piece of work, as well as the tram being delivered. It should interface with Dudley Port Station, so you've got that natural interchange between train and tram. And then, of course, we need to look at the environment on the outside just to make sure it's not causing any sort of undue impacts.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Lal?
Thank you, Jay. So, while it's right thing to do that we go for the value for money options, like cheaper options, but then that's not necessarily the best. Because at the end of the day, our objective is get mass movement, get more passengers using our public transport. And from my observation of our Metro Line 1, and I think the original proposal was to put it on the main A41, through Soho Road.
Yeah.
But that seemed to be too expensive. So what have we done? Put it on a cheaper option, just use railway line. And over the years, I think we are still struggling to get the maximum number of passengers, which could have been realised. So obviously, the cheap option is not necessarily the best for what we want to do. If you look at the European models, all the trams are on the main road. They have a bigger road than us, so they have lots of wider roads. The trams and the cycles and the normal cars, they go on the same road. So I would say that these cheap options are not actually going to give us the higher patronage. So I'm sure all the options would have been considered when we drafted these proposals. So I mean, I personally, if I were to go back to drawing for the Metro Line 1, I would have gone for the dear option, put it on the main roads where more people will be, it will be more accessible to a lot of people and will have high patronage.
Yes, thank you for that, Councillor Lal. I think there is a point there when we think about the future of Merry Hill, whether it can sustain itself solely as a retail park, I think is open to debate, you know, how things are. But then that might mean that it has a greater mixture of residential alongside the retail and a bigger leisure offer. So I think Merry Hill will change what it's offering. But I think the transport arrangement needs to obviously be adaptable and to make sure that it can encompass whatever changes Merry Hill sees. Anne, I don't know whether there's anything that you want to comment on the Devo ask in terms of funding, because obviously we've had a private paper at the last Transport Committee, but I know you put a public paper out on the funding options.
That's right.
So I don't know if there's anything you want to comment on in terms of
I can do that. I'll just do it briefly if that's okay. I mean, obviously, like all major projects and what's happening globally, we're being impacted with inflation rises, supply chains, cost of living, labour market. That's having an impact on materials and construction costs for the Metro. The funding arrangements, the funding model that we have is also predicated on fare box as well as the grants that Carl mentioned. And through the pandemic, of course, we saw very low patronage. I'm really pleased to say that patronage is rising, and particularly during the Commonwealth Games, it exceeded itself I think twice over. We are seeing that rise back in patronage, but because it has been lower, that's impacted the funding model that we use to fund the whole section. So still committed to delivering the full section through to Brierley Hill. I've been with Dudley Leader this week, in fact, just going through those proposals, and we've got a number of mitigations where we're trying to make sure that we can add to the funding pot for the whole scheme, and obviously through the devolution as a trailblazer devolution authority, we're working with government on areas like levelling up zones, and particularly on this particular case through the Wednesbury to Brierley Hill, there are a number of development plots. You mentioned about properties being demolished and so on, but actually what's happened with the metro line, it's stimulated a lot of interest and investment in a number of development plots that probably would have laid dormant for longer as well. That includes investment in Merry Hill Shopping Centre, as you've just sort of alluded to. It will change over time, and some of the other parcels of land as well, and not least the regeneration within Dudley Town Centre as well. So we're working through the devolution deal. There's also through the fiscal devolution asks as well, to make sure that we are in a position where we have more flexibility about funding that can come into the authority, that can allow us to borrow money to deliver this, not just this project, but some of our other investment projects as well. So we're working through all of those, but of course at the moment for everybody, not just the Combined Authority, for all authorities, your own capital projects, and nationally for national government on their capital projects, these inflationary rises is having an impact. But we are trying to work through those strategies, still committed to the full route. We've got all the Transport and Works Act powers for those as well, and we're working through those other investments or other developments that are happening to make sure that they don't falter as well.
Can I just ask a quick question about the Transport and Work Act powers?
Yes.
Do they expire?
So once you've started, you've got the powers to complete. I think the only area that we are having to manage is the CPO powers around, but we've got all of the parcels of land that we need. Some of the land has been given to us rather than through CPO powers. It's been given to us in agreement with the landowners where we've got leases and so on. So we just need to extend those. I think it's beyond 25. So that is that should be well covered.
I suppose my concern was, would there be any expiry of Traffic and Work Act powers if the funding issue was delayed further?
No, we've started and we've done some advanced works beyond Dudley, so we've moved a lot of utility works, for example, to clear the space for the tram to be constructed. So we've already, it's a bit like planning permission. Once you've started your build, you've enacted your planning permission, and you carry on until you finish.
Lovely, thank you. Do I have any further questions from the committee? So I am going to allow Tim 2 minutes to respond solely to the questions that he raised in relation to this, and then I'll draw that to a close. So Tim, you have 2 minutes.
Right, can I explain that this is a principal mainline railway of national strategic significance according to Network Rail and the Department for Transport. It's already opened at the Derby end, it's opened at the Worcester end. And now our transport officers here are breaking the central section that has had no passenger trains for 50 years, breaking it up into light rail, very light rail, and possibly even ultra light rail, which is the Stourbridge shuttle from Stourbridge up to Brierley Hill. Now, it is ridiculous to put a tram on a mainline railway, isn't it? No other place in the world would do such a thing. But this has gone on now for 40 years, since the 1980s. In fact, last decade, West Midlands Railway, I believe it was the train operating company that was wanting to bring trains on this mainline railway up to the waterfront from Stourbridge Junction. Trains from Snow Hill to Stourbridge, then they would reverse out of Stourbridge up to the waterfront. But once the contracts were awarded, then all that was forgotten about. But it could still be done. You could still have passenger trains during the daytime, freight trains at night, coming up from Stourbridge to the waterfront, or even up the Cinder Bank roundabout. where the very light rail test track terminates, descend here. So there is no excuse not to have commuter and regional trains back on this mainline railway once more, at least as far as the waterfront. And then you've got to put the trains back, you officers, from Walsall, well, from Wednesbury up to Derby and finish the line. It's ridiculous breaking it up in the way that you are. This is a scandal. And it's a waste of money. You are spending over £500 million now to wreck a perfectly good principal mainline railway between Worcester and Derby, one of only two on the western side of Birmingham, the Black Country. There are loads on the eastern side, the East Coast Main Line, the West Coast Main Line, and all the others. This is one of only two, and it's needed for freight and passenger trains. And don't muck up railway lines with trams. Please, just make life simple for yourselves. And when you've got a mainline railway that's designed for trains, put trains on it. Freight at night, which you could still do with this one. So have the metro, if you really can't stop metro, but metro coming down to the waterfront.
2 minutes are up, I'm
Stop
afraid.
from there.
Thank you for your contribution and thank you for your response. You're obviously welcome to stay for the remainder of the session because it is public, but there is no other ability to speak at the meeting.
The
So I'll
Chair,
have to
can I
ask you
ask, please, for dialogue between me and the officers so that we have some
Well,
movement on this
As
problem?
far as
Because it's stopped now.
Okay.
This
Can I-
section won't be built.
Tim, I'm going to have to ask you to sit down, please. So as far as the original question that came to this committee the last time, as chair, I'm satisfied that the response has been very full, comprehensive, and I would think that the committee will agree that the response is a comprehensive response and outlines the issues the constraints that you're working with, and also the rationale behind the decisions that have been made, which are quite long-standing decisions. Okay, thank you. So I'm going to move on then, and we move on to item number 7, and that is the walking and cycling index report. Thank you. All right, Tim, thank you. So, Riddy, do you want to come to the table? The acoustics in this room aren't great.
I have brought some copies of the report, so I can pass those round. You've had them all in your pack, I believe, so but there's some physical copies here.
And we have Adam Tranter as well.
And we have Adam as well, who's written the foreword for the last report that was just published. So thank you for having me along. I just wanted to explain really what this is, what the report is, where it's come from, and what it could be used for, and how. A little sort of call to action at the end from you as well. So the Walking and Cycling Index, it's an assessment of the development of walking and wheeling and cycling in cities, towns and urban areas across the UK and Ireland. There are 18 cities, and cities is sort of used in a wider context. So Midlands Combined Authority comes under a city region, just for the ease of the report. And it's funded by the Freshfield Foundation and Transport for Scotland and various partners in the city, including the Combined Authority here. It began in 2015 as Bike Life and reports every 2 years. So what's in it? There's lots of city data. So again, city being used widely for Combined Authority. So data related to walking, wheeling and cycling, for example, the infrastructure provision. And then there's also an independent and representative survey of over 1,100 people in each city region. So here that would include residents from each of the 7 local authorities within the Combined Authority. And it's got lots of modelling data in it as well, data on trips walked, wheeled and cycled and the corresponding benefits. There's lots of case studies as well on how this has sort of impacted people and how they have used walking, wheeling and cycling within their lives to make things easier, or to how changes in their local area have made things better for them to use. And then there's also some information on the city, so how it's improved, so number of miles, number of bike stands, number of miles of cycle infrastructure, places where services are available within sort of a 20-minute neighbourhood style approach. there's a couple of sort of key messages. So each of the city regions has its own independent report. So we've got the West Midlands one, and then there's corresponding ones across Manchester, Liverpool, various places. And then there's a UK aggregated report as well that takes in all of this information and sort of gives you a UK-wide picture. And sort of the key messages that have come out this year, that walking and wheeling is not inclusive. So just 56% of disabled people and 55% of residents on low income feel welcome when walking and wheeling in their neighbourhood. And 52% believe that it's safer for, only 52% believe that it's safe for children to walk in their local area. But people are walking and wheeling more frequently than any other form of urban transport, with 50% doing so at least 5 or more days each week. And then one of the other biggest messages that we put out this year alongside this report was around, which you may have seen in the press, was around our call to ban pavement parking, because from the report it would help 70% of all residents to walk and wheel more. So we've got some case studies that show where pavement parking obstructs the pavement for people using various different mobility vehicles, or children and parents with pushchairs walking to school, things like that. So within the report, there's lots of these case studies that show how improving the environment in those ways can support residents to be more physically active on their journeys. And again, cycling safety has improved, but there is more to do. So there's more statistics within the report that sort of cover some of those elements. But having had a chat with the chair before, there's a couple of sort of key comparisons. I think Greater Manchester is one of our most comparative regions that we talked about, that we wanted to pull out some of the information. And having had a look at both the reports, the stats are very similar. So in terms of, so the West Midlands, 13% of residents cycle at least once a week. That's similar, if not the same, to, in fact, it's the same as Greater Manchester. Similarly, people who ever cycle, we've got 32% in the West Midlands and 31% in Greater Manchester. So seeing all the different progress that Greater Manchester have made and the progress that we've made, there's a lot of similarities happening between the two regions. Equally on walking, the stats again are within a couple of percentage points of people who walk at least 5 days a week or more. And then one thing to sort of again highlight is that residents do want more funding for walking, wheeling, cycling and public transport, with only sort of between 50 and 67% wanting more spend on those active and public transport modes, and only 30% of people wanting local authorities to spend more money on driving and on forms that support driving. So this is up from the 2019 report. So we're seeing more people want this infrastructure available to them. They want to make the switch to these modes, but they need it to be safer, more accessible, more connected, and they need the continuity of these options so that they can do it in a way that supports their whole journey. They also want more support to make multimodal journeys. So we're talking about sort of the metro, looking at how people might walk to the metro stations and that infrastructure around the metro to get there by walking, wheeling or cycling, and then the provision to lock up bikes and feel comfortable and safe to do so, and then perhaps make that next part of the journey by public transport, whether that's train, metro, bus. So there's a lot sort of evidence in the report that says that people want these connected elements of the journey, and to be able to do that sort of seamlessly. Public cycle tracks. I think the only other thing that I wanted to sort of highlight from the data again is support for things like school streets and low traffic neighbourhoods. Again, the comparison between West Midlands and Greater Manchester is again the same, and it's over sort of 50% that want us to be implementing more things like school streets, and again the same with low traffic neighbourhoods, and again very similar results again with Greater Manchester. support across, and you will see I brought both copies of the report, one from 2019 and one from 2020. You'll see that support has dropped ever so slightly, but it's still very, very positive for implementing a lot of these changes to the neighbourhood to make it easier for people to use these active modes. And when you look at the sort of breakdown of the data, although the number of people that support it have dropped, actually, when you take out the people that say don't know, the number of people that oppose it has also dropped. So there's still that sort of don't know in the middle, but there's less people that disagree. So there's still this very strong support for all these active travel modes, with more than half, and in some cases up to 80% of people supporting various measures like segregated cycle tracks, 20-minute neighbourhoods, low traffic neighbourhoods, space for socialising, and closing streets to school, so school streets again, closing streets to traffic around school. The one other thing that's key to highlight in this report is that it includes a lot more walking data, which can sometimes be forgotten. It's a little bit left behind sometimes, that walking data. And we often think about walking in these sort of core walking zone type measures where we think about, say, a city centre or a town centre region where all our shopping and facilities are, and we look at making those spaces better for walking, whereas what we need to be thinking about is that more holistic walking element for people to get door to door from their homes to those shopping places, as well as making it suitable in those places with the high services. So we often put in benches and spaces for people to sit and rest in those high footfall areas where those shops and services are, but we don't often always think about those journeys that people are making from their door to those places in the first place. And I know we're doing a lot more work on this, and I know that there's quite a lot of active travel element within the local transport plan 5. So I know that we've started to, as a combined authority, started to think about this a lot more, and that all of this sort of integration of different services and active modes is being considered in a different way. And so sort of the call to action really here is that we've got some evidence base here that can support that, and this evidence base speaks of that silent majority a bit more, whereas the public sort of conversation is quite polarised. You've got the very, very anti, the very, very for, and they're the really vocal ones at either end of this debate. And the data in here sort of shows you that that silent majority that aren't saying very much are all very positive around creating more active travel infrastructure in their areas. And equally, this, as I mentioned before, all of the people that responded to the survey will be from across the combined authority. So again, where you've got a lot more vocal people in certain local authorities within the combined authority, this data is talking across all 7. So it's again, where we've got slower progress, say in some of the local authorities within the combined authority, there is still that mandate from the public that they also want to see this within their areas. So it's how we can support those local authorities a bit more. And I know Adam's doing a bit of work around that on looking at capacity within some of the authorities that have are starting to catch up with, say, what's happening in Birmingham, for example. I think that's sort of everything that I wanted to say. That we other local authorities have been using the data and have had some positive sort of results. I've got a quote from sort of Chris Boardman from Manchester from 2019, where he utilised what it was then Bike Life and Walking and Cycling Index report to just support a conversation around their B-Lines network. So it can be very useful. It does speak for that silent majority, and it does give you sort of an evidence base to use. And equally, I just wanted to sort of introduce myself as well as a support person, an ally, someone who's there to be able to support you with questions and answers that come up within this agenda. And us at Sustrans will, I'm more than happy to have those sort of critical friend conversations or those supportive conversations if you're looking at some of these projects within your local authorities themselves. So I don't know if you wanted to say any more on that, Adam.
Yeah, just add a little bit. You know, we work closely with lots of different partners, and Sustrans is an important one of them. We like this report because this report is sort of sometimes uncomfortably totally out of our hands. It's done totally independently. We don't control the narrative or the data or the way it's conducted, but it is, as Riddy says, really nationally and regionally representative. So you'll have a lot of experiences as obviously as councillors in your wards that a lot of the things that really motivate people to contact you are often at the both ends of that spectrum, either really for something or really against something. And actually, we think that we know that there's a strong middle ground that wants a kind of cleaner, more sustainable, dare say at the moment, a cheaper alternative to travel. So my job as Commissioner is about kind of giving people the dignity of choice, really. You know, for many people, walking, wheeling and cycling, unfortunately in this region and in this country, we've sort of taken away that freedom of choice in some, whether it comes down to paid parking or it comes down to people's perception that cycling especially is not a safe endeavour. So this data is really important, having the evidence base is really important, and now, as really alluded to, I actually think that this is a really solid report. I actually feel like, and I've said this is not a surprise, but what I feel like we've got the data. This is one of many reports we have that shows that there is support for cycling and walking, and our focus now as a region should be on delivery. So we've secured as a region a lot of money for cycling and walking as part of the City Region Sustainable Transport Settlement, which was over £1 billion. 254 million of that is for schemes that will have an active travel element to it. There might be bus and active travel corridors as an example in the Black Country. And we've also received 17.2 million as part of Active Travel Fund 3. And we've just received £3.2 million of revenue funding to support local authorities in building that capacity. So there's a lot of will in this region to develop this, freedom of choice about the way we move. But we know that there's not always the officer capacity to carry it through. So that's what the government's seeing and investing in. And the West Midlands was one of the top few regions in the whole country in terms of the amount of money it's received, which is great. We just need to crack on and get delivery.
Thank you. So I've got Councillor McGarity first.
Thank you. It's a very good report, very comprehensive. But I just wondered about, it says walking 5 days a week, but it doesn't actually say how far. And the other thing is, I wondered, I read someplace about school children who dropped off from the car going to school, and that's the amount of walking that they do, apart from walk around in the school. And I find that quite concerning, especially in this area where you have a lot of obesity. I'm actually a yoga teacher. I teach children as well, yoga, and I'm really surprised how stiff they are. Even little tots, little 5-year-olds. So I just think exercise is really important. So I'd be keen to kind of use some of your expertise and kind of push more exercise in the area. But yeah, the question is really, how far are people walking? I know it's difficult to define.
Yeah, I couldn't tell you the answer off the top of my head, but I can absolutely find out for you what the question, the exact question was asked, whether there's a distance involved in the answer to that. And then the comment around school children. So again, this positive support for school streets. So a school street is where there's no traffic allowed on a particular street around the school, and there's a bigger uptake, especially in the West Midlands as well, on implementing these across the region. There's still a little bit of misunderstanding or not misunderstanding, that's not the right word. There's still a little bit of debate on the best possible mechanism to put it into place, whether it's just signage or whether there are people there stewarding or whether there's ANPR, number plate cameras. So there's lots of different ways to do that. So there's a little bit of question as to what the best methodology is, and it works in different ways in different places, but it does encourage and the conversation around it, and when some behaviour change work is done around the school street, the children, to encourage their parents to walk them to school. And most places where there's been, say, a trial, for example, everyone sort of agrees that it's a better environment around the school. We've got some really lovely case studies where someone said, I used to dash to school in my car with my child, and now we walk, and I have learnt more about my child in the last 2 weeks of walking with them to school than I had in the last 6 months of driving them and being in a rush. So, you know, there's little stories where we can start telling that tale and explaining the other benefits, not just the physical activity, but the mental health of having that small piece of exercise, or that connection with the people around them, that environmental health for air pollution around the school as well. So there's lots of rolling benefits, and you just need someone to see one, and then they can start realising the others. And that's where it's useful to have this understanding of that it's not just me that wants this, there's a big silent majority of people that also agree this would be great to do.
Just on school streets, I think, and school travel generally, I think I can't find any way to say it than I think it's kind of sort of a national shame how children over decades and decades have been less able to walk and cycle to school. I think it's something that should be protected as part of our culture, and of course it's a very vicious perpetual cycle, because as soon as someone gets in a car because they don't feel that it's safe for their children to walk to school, they add to the issues that are caused by making it less safe, because more people are therefore driving in and around the school gates, and we know that that's where the collisions and incidents happen. So we were able to secure some dedicated funding for school streets, and I expect to be able to get some more dedicated funding for school streets in the next round of Active Travel Funding 4 as well. They're very popular generally, and they're very popular with central government. They want to do more of these things, and they can be that real kind of moment where you go, okay, I get it. And for those people who, so obviously the system allows people to choose the schools that they go to, so some people might choose a school where they have to drive to school. It also encourages those who, I visited Birdswell and Solihull, where they've got some measures, they haven't got a school street, but they've got some measures around pedestrian crossings, and they've done a massive encouragement with they've done a deal with the local pub that opens up their car park in the morning and allows people who come in slightly further to park in the car park, stroll, use a new pedestrian crossing we funded, and go into school. So it can be, it's a bit of a blunt instrument, and you do get a bit of, it's change, but I think it can be really powerful, and they're very cheap to implement as well. So school streets, I think, is a really important thing that we're focusing on, and I think should be a focus for the region and the country.
Thank you.
Councillor Sims.
Morning, thank you. The pavement parking is a big issue, I think, all over the place, everywhere. My concerns are, if we're all honest, we've all probably parked on a pavement for whatever reason, or we've done. Some of the streets and roads by myself where I actually live are so narrow, you have to park on the road to allow the traffic to pass by. A lot of people in certain roads and streets have just adopted the option to park on the one side and everybody follows suit, so at least you've got a clear way to go through. I've been in situations where I have had to push a pram through and you can't get through, you've had to go on the road, so I can see as a motorist and as a pedestrian as well. I honestly don't think, I don't know what the solution could be on that, because if you're down a road that's really, really narrow, you've got no choice.
I totally understand.
It's a tough one with that, but then you've got to think of the safety of disabled people and young children.
I think where they've done it in London, they've done it through banned everywhere except in certain cases. So where there's a road and you'll still see the markings on the pavement where you've got that box then where someone can park, but it's looking at those cases where they need to, and I believe that's how they've sort of done it, but it's not okay everywhere, but we've got some exceptions. Equally, like you said, to have then those informal rules perhaps made more formal, that parking's only available on one side to then allow that access. So it's just partly it's about shifting mindset, so that you turn to everyone and say, don't do it, but okay, we know that there's a few places where you might have to in order to make this work for everybody. But then when thinking about those places where you do half pavement parking, half on the road, and have those options, it's then about having the dropped curbs in place so that people can cross and use the wider pavement on the other side, or the crossing point. So it's about thinking about the journey as a whole for someone that's using that stretch of street that might have pavement parking on one side, for example. So yeah, I think it's possible. I think it's about shifting the idea that it's allowed everywhere and that we can just do it because why not? We won't harm for 5 minutes, will it? It will.
And with the cycling, believe it or not, I cycled for a good many years. But then it just got a bit mad with the traffic and the cars and lorries thinking they are on the road and not giving cyclists any room or space to manoeuvre around, whether it's an island or just over a crossroad. So that went by the way many years ago. But in a lot of our areas, the money's funded there to put cycle lanes for a reason, which is brilliant. But you can be cycling along the lane, then all of a sudden it stops.
No.
Oh, he's got the lane stop.
Where do you go?
Yes.
Do you carry on the road or do you on the path? You know, to me, being honest, that's just a bit mad. It's a yeah. I don't know who come up with that in whatever areas and boroughs, but the cycle lanes just suddenly stop, and people are laughing at local authorities when they do this. You know, such a waste. It is a waste of money. At the end of the day, you may be one thing thinking you're keeping the cyclist safety for 50 to 100 yards up the road, then you're just left on a dual carriageway. So with the cycling, and my last one is a biggie for me, is the streets, school streets. We have loads of issues, and there's one particular school close by myself. Every term, possibly 2 children get knocked over or took an ambulance to hospital because of parking around the school. My personal opinion on that is, if you can walk to school within a distance, walk to school. You get some people who are on the way to work or different to drop the children off and carry on. The thing with blocking the street off for children to walk up that street, it just, if the school's there and the parking around it and you put no parking there, it pushes it out to the next streets, where yes, they're walking from, but it's just pushing the parking situations onto more residents, and then there's more arguments. I've been in a few debates. I've actually told people to move the cars, you know, they're parking on corners, and you know, you're leaving that there. Yeah, so you know, I have had several debates, shall we say, but I think more walking is needed with the children, but I think it's got to be a cultural change within the school as well. And you can talk to the child as much and say, I've worked with children for 20 years as well. You can talk to children and say, come and walk to school, get mummy to do this, daddy or nanny over bring you to school. That child will go happy as Larry, can we walk to school and all happy? That adult will say, nah, I'm going in the car. This is what happens. So you can install it in the children, which is good, but it's got to be a cultural change for the adults as well. And that's when you come into a lot of the parking issues with parking on the pavement and blocking the roads off, and it's one vicious circle. And we live that every day, 300 or 400 yards. By myself, there's about 5 primary schools in very, very close proximity. So if you block one road off for one school, you're pushing it to the next, and it's something does need to be done. And we've got a high rate of obesity, so it all needs to be looked at.
Just on cycling, and I think it would be the best place for walking because of the research you've done around displacement in school streets. I totally agree with you, Councillor. I mean, it's pretty much one of the main reasons I wanted to do this job is I think we've been treating cycling especially as a kind of afterthought, using small pots of money that aren't fit for purpose. And actually what we find is that there's actually been research that shows that, remember for about 30 years, we've been painting cycle lanes on the road, and actually evidence now shows that cars pass people more closely when that happens rather than when there's nothing at all. So we know that we need to build sort of protected, segregated cycleways away from motor traffic to get people like yourself to go, actually it's not the traffic because I'm away from it effectively. And we're really sort of I guess in the last couple of years has been quite a shift, and ourselves and our local authority partners are kind of getting used to it. But we have this transport document called LTN 120, which is government guidance, was published in the July 2020, and it is basically a government good design guidance document of what is acceptable. And the government has said that our funding depends on meeting those guidelines. So it tackles the sort of cycling shouldn't just end in the middle of nowhere, and it tackles the kind of, them not being fit for purpose. So we're in a really good position, and we also have I have a technical advisor, a chap called Phil Jones, who co-wrote that document. So he's in a really good position to help local authorities, and is up for helping local authority officers to kind of peer review schemes and how to scrutinise them a little bit more. So it should be getting better. Of course, the issue is with the network. You are always going to have some start and end points with the way funding is, and that's unfortunate as the way it is. But it was also how we started building roads. Not every it takes time effectively. And then school streets, I think I don't really talk about the detail, but I think just the overall I'd say is that this is going to be hard because but we sort of we know what the problems are, and we in many cases know what the solutions are. We do find that when it's harder for people to drive to the school gate, we do see that mode shift. So not as many cars are displaced if they are displaced. So there are some benefits, and not having as much experience as you, but having gone into a couple of schools in this job, it's very clear to me that the kids know exactly what we should be doing, and it's us adults that need to kind of do it, really.
Yeah. The only other one thing to touch on as well is a lot of cycling. I used to do a lot of cycling on the canals. Years ago, you'd have to stop on a little dirt track and go through. But over the years, working alongside with Canals and River Trust, a lot of the walkways along the canals are really, really good now for cycling. I'm not saying everybody wants to cycle on the canals during certain times of the day, but it is a quick and easy access way to get. You can get Wolverhampton to Sandwell through Dudley, straight into Birmingham. If you know the canals kind of thing, you can access them and get really, really far.
Agreed, and there's a lot more surfacing work being done on the canals in order to make that possible. A lot of barrier removal as well to make it possible for people to, the physical metal barriers to make it possible. Just quickly on I hope Adam answered your question around the connectivity element of cycle lanes just ending well enough. It's part of another document that is called an LC WIP, Local Cycling and Walking Infrastructure Plan. There is one for the Combined Authority, and then each of the local authorities within the Combined Authority, I think, have one.
Or developing it.
Or
that
developing
is
it.
Working right now.
And within that, there are sort of key things that the network needs to be, and one of those is connected. But as Adam says, it just takes that time to connect it up. But it's about thinking of it as a holistic network, so that you see that each part is one part of a bigger piece rather than an individual piece in itself, and that helps to slow down that cyclist dismount or an abrupt end to your cycle lane. And then just quickly on the school streets, South Trans have just released a report where we worked with the Road Safety Trust, where we did some camera monitoring of 2 schools in Birmingham that have school streets on them, but the camera monitoring was on adjacent streets to look at displacement. And the short answer is it does it in the very short term, it does increase that displacement, but the evidence shows that within a few weeks it dissipates, and there's not that displacement on local roads. Obviously, in your case with 5 schools in very close proximity, it would need to be that all 5 schools work together on their access to school measures, because they're all so close together, you'll have that displacement from these other schools, rather than if there's a school sort of not around many other schools, then you don't get that displacement from the data. And I'm happy to share that with you.
Anne, did you want to comment?
I was just going to pick up a couple of points, one which hasn't yet been covered, but I was just going to also mention the LC WIP. Obviously, we've got a strategic approach to what our cycle network in the region should look like, and we've been very, very successful already with the Active Travel Fund and also through CRSTS funding for I can't remember the exact value, but it's sort of about £250 million worth of investment in cycling infrastructure. Obviously, we're working with the cycling teams across all of our organisations to make sure that they conform to that LTN 120. Of course, there will always be instances where road space is at a premium and there's a higher mode which overrides the space requirement. So that's something that we always have to grapple with as well. And we need to be careful about that. But the one point I wanted to raise is obviously there's been a consultation by government on pavement parking. That was back in, I think Mars has called it, back in 2020. They have not yet published the outcome of that, but that would take parking enforcement, parking on pavements. It would then make it a local authority responsibility, and that would be enable you to target those locations and come up with the way in which you would design based on what you've said around very narrow streets as well. How would you design that, and how would you work with that, and how would you enforce it? Because it's just not enforced at the moment where it currently sits. It's lower down the police priority, but that's something to watch out for as well. And we're keeping a close eye on that. We've been working with the local authorities on what having the powers to do pavement parking would mean. How would we use it to what benefit to improve walking, road safety, etc. And it does feature in the devolution papers as well.
Thank you.
I'm going to take just one more question and then I'm going to give it in the discussion because we have got another 2 papers to receive yet. So Councillor McCarthy, you the next indicator.
Right, I'll try and be quick then. As a recent returner to the freedom and independence of cycling, I approach your report with some enthusiasm. I tended to find myself with death by statistics, and perhaps I've missed some of the key points of it as a result of that. What I hoped to find in there were a little bit more about the relationship between cyclists and pedestrians, because there are huge amounts of our areas that cyclists regularly use, and they're seeded with quite frequently dangerous demotivators or forced dismounts and things like that. So what are we doing about that? And also the fact that the areas where we do share roads with cars or the cycle paths are often so fragmented. And again, forced dismounts, awkward crossings of roads, pushing the bike. It's how, if we list the demotivators and say, what are we doing about them, then we can take the thing forward.
Agreed. And the document that Adam mentioned, LTN 120, so it's guidance to give you the best, to show you the best way to build infrastructure, and it has indicated that shared use is no longer recommended. So where it exists now, it's about either looking for the best way to potentially shift it or change who's using the space, or it's about making it the best possible option with clearly demarked points with accessible crossing points. So that document in itself gives you lots of guidance on how to approach this, but the bottom line that it says is don't let people share, because different modes need different space, and people walking at a much different pace to people cycling, and putting them together is not advisable. So I agree, and again it comes back to that point about the network being a whole, and looking at those points of where cyclists are severed from their network and trying to rectify those and redirect cyclists on a route that's more suitable, that doesn't mean that they have to stop and start a lot.
Yeah, it's just that we more globally are responsible and very much look at the shapes of the spaces.
Yes.
And many of them have got a 1950s design now, with all sorts of horrible things which are no longer relevant in most cases, because we also have electric bikes that we do have a lot of dismounts where people come down sharp inclines off bridges and things like that.
Yeah,
and now an electric bike can do that all the time. So is it any longer relevant? I think people have got to learn to live together a little bit.
Yeah, I think on the cyclist dismount stuff and the crossings and everything like that, I think just to be, blunt about it, a designer could decide to do that because, it's easier than solve the problem and cheaper to solve the problem, and no one would question it because there was none of those checks and balances. And effectively what the government is now saying, and obviously we can't fix the past so much and times move on and it was probably fit for the time, but the government's effectively saying, we won't give you the money unless you meet this criteria. And in some cases, we've got a new government, and some of the figures in number 10 have moved on, but in some cases the government was willing to say, well, we'll actually take money away from other modes of transport if you don't get this right.
We'll
So
give powers to an authority like ours.
yeah, quite
That's a question
possibly.
we're going to ask.
So I think I think we're in a better place. It will take a long time to solve some of the issues that there are, but we're now looking at, you know, things like I ride a cargo bike with my kids in the front and I can't dismount when it tells me to. So, you know, those signs shouldn't be there, and they're not in the guidance anymore.
So anything on powers, and then I'll finish.
On powers,
Yeah.
in what? Sorry, in what?
In future devolution powers or powers that could be devolved. You talked about government having the powers. Could be devolved.
Yeah, so we're effectively
Money
it's not a devolution ask as such, but what we have, so the government has created a new body called Active Travel England, which is responsible for the active travel budget now. It's spun out of the Department for Transport. And what it's saying is that at the moment, it will give us, in the future funds, it will give us sort of 10% of the funding to design a scheme, and then it will have a gatekeeping process that will say, you know, does it have cyclist dismount signs? Does it share with pedestrians, etc.? If it does, go back to the drawing board and fix it, and then we'll give you the remainder of the money. The general consensus at the moment from my conversations is that if we can prove that this works, and that's why we're developing local capability to do it, the government will just let us get on with it and help with that process, and maybe they'll spot check occasionally to make sure that we're following the right sort of principles. So that's happening now, and it's all very new. We're talking like Active Travel England's been set up for 5 weeks, so it's a really exciting time, but there'll be some learning as well.
Equally, there
Okay.
we have checks and balances on
So
planning.
future report, give us a bit more.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'll leave these here so you can have them, and my details are on there as well if you'd like to get in touch. But thank you for the opportunity.
Apologies to colleagues who haven't been able to ask questions, but we've got another 2 papers that we do need to receive this morning. We were just asked to receive and note the progress on that, so I think we've done that adequately. I think my only closing comment would be the challenge with actually working with local authorities to make some of these things happen. You know, my own authority being the case in point. So yeah, I mean, brilliant, but I think that's where a big part of your challenge lies. So
Very open to helping as well, so just get in touch.
Absolutely.
I was with Councillor Celine the other day, and we were going to do school streets. So
right, that sounds good.
yeah, cool. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for
Thank you.
Okay, so we move on to agenda item 8, please. So I've got Chris Lane, who is presenting the connected and automated mobility in West Midlands.
Thank you very much. This is really just to give you an update on the work we've done over the last few years on connected and automated mobility, and really just to whet your appetite for what might be coming next. I've got a few. So I've got a few slides that summarise what's in the report, and happy to take questions at the end. It's worth saying that some of the very first trials of automated driving were actually here in the West Midlands. The 2 pictures are here in Coventry. Some of you may recognise the locations. The chap at the top is just like all of us on his mobile phone. He had no idea that that car was driving itself. Good news, it stopped and let him cross the zebra crossing. The bottom one is a famous or infamous, depending on how you look at it, junction in Coventry, which is negotiated between buses, cyclists, pedestrians. I suppose after the previous discussion, we probably shouldn't mention that. But again, we put an autonomous vehicle through there. So really, the West Midlands comes from a legacy of doing this very early on. It's fair to say that work was led by Coventry City Council, supported by us. And that's a sort of a flavour to the way we deliver connected and automated mobility. It's not just Transport for West Midlands. It's genuinely collaborative with the local authorities. But that's generated a lot of investment, and the good news, particularly for Anne, it's not our core funding, it's not levy funding. So we've attracted grants and private sector investment for autonomous vehicles and their associated services in excess of £35 million. That's not all money coming to us, but the private sector's invested. And that's allowed us to be a catalyst for our own innovation ecosystem. So having autonomous vehicles has allowed us to do other things and allowed us to create other bids. And we've had £1 million from the Department for Transport to look at the Midlands Motorway Hub and start to get messages to vehicles and explore what that looks like. We've had £8 million of investment in mobility data, and our future transport zone, which I would say is one of the best in the country. We've had £22 billion investment, and I'm sure you'll see that at this committee at another time. And alongside that, what we're trying to do is bring our innovation projects, layer them on top of each other. So again, we've had investment in 5G and other things in excess of £18 million. That's not combined authority money, that's money that's come in to the authority from elsewhere, from government grants and from the private sector. We've got a really great opportunity here in the West Midlands. The way you design and develop an autonomous service is you start with a computer and you simulate a model, whether that works. You then take it onto a test track, so it's safe, there's nobody about, it's fully controlled, and then ultimately, once you know that it's safe, you take it onto the real world. And we have that within our consortiums here in the West Midlands. And in fact, at Warwick University, they've got the vehicle you can sit in, 3D simulator. If anyone's been to those cinemas, that's fully immersive. They've got a car you can sit in, takes you onto the M42 or down the roads in Coventry, and you can sit in the car. And they can make it rain, they can make it snow. They can't make it happen in the real world, but the great news is that anyone wants to test these services, we've got great capabilities. The closed circuit at Hariba Myra, just outside the West Midlands, but will allow them to be part of this. And then our own roads. And on our own roads, we've developed what's called Midlands Future Mobility Testbed. So we've digitised and documented a large number of roads in the West Midlands. We've put technology on them to allow people to test autonomous vehicles. And we've managed to cover motorways and main roads, the city centres and all the things that happen in a city centre, our rural roads and the features that you've got there, and unique and complex driving locations. We've even looked at where you might come face to face with a horse, for example. So again, within that environment, if you want to test your service or look at your service, we've got a great place where you can come and do that. Again, we've built on previous projects. So the previous projects in Coventry and other work, we've made sure are part of this bigger test bed. What we're also doing is looking at where we can use that technology for our day-to-day services as well. So a really important part of what we're doing here is learning how we might need to change as local authorities and a combined authority as this new technology comes on board. So we're right at the outset working with these companies, understanding what they need, what they do, what they can't do, and making sure we can be adaptable and we can be flexible to do that. I did talk about the fact that we work with local authorities. This is a really good example. This is a shuttle owned by Solihull Council. So they bought this shuttle and they've tested that at the NEC and at the airport and doing a number of other trials. It's a really good example of where we've worked collaboratively. So we've worked alongside Solihull, we've helped them, we work with that, and we're using this potentially to take things forwards and look at other opportunities. And that shuttle has actually been used. I don't know whether any of you have been on it, but I'm sure Solihull will get you on if you'd like to. But that's been used with real people. So at some of the events, the NEC, we've got real people on that to shuttle them backwards and forwards just to understand what they think of it. One of the really important things we think of this new technology is that people don't see it, they're not seeing. We want to make sure it's not only safe and works, but we want to make sure that people start to see it and use it and trial it. So what next? The government vision for connected automated mobility, and I've just released a series of communications on this. We'll have to see if we're still the same next week, whether they still think the same as they did previously, but I suspect they will on this. And what the government's saying is by 2025, the UK will begin to see deployments of self-driving vehicles, improving the way people and goods are moved around the nation. So they see 2025 as seeing some real autonomous vehicles. What we're doing as a region is we are bidding into the opportunities that the government's outlined. So there's a current round of funding looking at mass transit and looking at public transport services without the supervisor in the vehicle. So we bid into both of those funds with consortium partners, and we'll continue to work with government to maximise the opportunity to win those bids. And that's with private sector consortium. We really benefit from here in the West Midlands. We did have 3 autonomous vehicle manufacturers, but we've got 2 at the moment. One of them, unfortunately, didn't survive the current financial climate. But we do have companies here developing and growing technology within the West Midlands and working closely with those. Because the other part of this, we want to see businesses thrive here in the West Midlands. So we want to see this new business done here and happen here. So going forward, we're working very closely with government on that legislation and what's coming next. A lot of things will depend on the transport bill and moving those forwards. If anyone wants to know more details about what they're proposing for legislation, there's been a whole paper about how do we deal with insurance, how do we deal with safety, and they are continuing to invest in encouraging trials of these types of autonomous services. What I just want to encourage you is to say we are seen as the largest test bed in the UK. We're very well respected and we've got very good contacts and discussions going on with government. And really just to finish off to say that the CAM stuff is not all that we're doing. It's part of a whole set of, I'm going to say, innovation or test bed projects that we're looking at. We've done some great work on 5G. We've done some work on mobility hubs and continue to do that for the City Regions project that was mentioned earlier. The Future Transport Zone has been a really excellent piece of work. We're looking at digitising the road network. And we've pinched the last one, the Urban Airport, which is actually Coventry's. But again, we work alongside local authorities in terms of looking at that new and future innovation. So I just wanted to say we think it's a really exciting time to be in the West Midlands. We want it to be seen as the place that people come and do transport innovation and start to develop their new mobility services and products.
Thank you very much for that presentation. So the purpose of this particular report coming today is to review the progress on this, which obviously you've fully outlined. So I've got Councillor McCarthy indicating first and then Councillor Singh.
That's what kind of work that is going on to manage the relationship between the man in the street, humans moving around these vehicles, and the vehicles themselves once they're in service. It's a bit like, to set the scene for it a bit, we have a relationship with the Metro tram. You don't walk out in front of one, you generally look if you're crossing the tracks.
That's great. So we're starting to consult with the general public. We've got a really great asset through our future transport zones. We've got an online market research community. We've already started to ask them about connected and automated mobility. What do they think? What do they see? As part of the projects that we bid for, a big part is public perception. So actually starting to show these vehicles whilst they're being monitored and supervised, start to understand what people's perception are and how they want to respond with those vehicles. So again, we do have projects that are running alongside the actual testing the technology. We think the actual public perception and public safety is absolutely critical. So that is part of the programme of work that we are looking at. Is that sort of mirrored by development of the law that will go around them? So the law has a very big aspect of safety case. So there's the safety aspect of the law is really critical. But again, we think it's with anything new, people haven't seen these, and they don't know how to respond. Not all their questions are answered yet, which is why we want to do these projects and be part of them to make sure the right answers are put in place, not just what people think the right answers are. But we've got a great population in the West Midlands. They've been very engaged, and we have engaged face to face and online and in front of a vehicle and in the vehicle itself. So again, we've asked people with the Solihull shuttle what they thought of it, and the general rule is once you appreciate you talking about other road users, once you're in a vehicle, you don't realise that you're in an automated vehicle. It just feels like a bus or a minibus. But again, we're doing this work and working really closely. We're taking a very step-by-step approach to understand and learn as we go forwards.
Thank you.
Councillor Singh.
Thank you. Just one is simple. It's digitalising road network. It's a geotagging you're using. How far it's gone, what the coverage is like at the moment. So
we've taken a digital map of the roads that we're using. So you could potentially sit at a computer and drive through those rural roads and go and test it. In terms of being able to monitor a trial that was on a rural road, we've got some mobile units. So we can actually take those mobile units out to any location and then run a trial or run a
basically you take like as an input, so you can just use as a test for testing purposes. So yeah, they're normal roads, but what we're saying to a company is if you wanted to test a rural road with a Ford, you know, that's in flood, we've got the data that will show you where that is, when it is. We can then also put some equipment out there to allow you to monitor that. The really important thing for us is that we do that in a controlled, monitored and safe way. So that's the benefit of a test bed. It is the real world, but we're safety paranoid.
So we'll make sure that things are fully.
The other digitalisation of the road network as well as the rules of the road.
Yes.
So we've got lots of roads that have got stop signs at the junctions or no parking and so on. So we're working with each of the local authorities under the Future Transport Zone banner on the rules of the road project to not only digitalise where the roads are, but digitalise the assets that are on the road that control and manage the traffic. So that is also
Yes, it is.
happening as well.
That was my question, the geotagging,
Yeah.
some weird and wonderful stuff. So you know exactly where it is.
Yeah, and that's really important. So as you think forward, not even an autonomous vehicle, a connected vehicle, at the moment we all read signs. What we want the vehicle of the future to do is to just pull down the database of information. And then when you've got a temporary speed control, a temporary restriction, the vehicle knows as well as the driver. So we think it's a really exciting piece of work.
Ultimately, if it was completely connected, you don't need signs. Just the rules of the road would talk to the vehicle, and then that also then declutters the road space and also reduces costs for maintenance and management of highway assets as well. So there's benefits all round really, but that's going to take a while to get there.
How in the States they did the last census and they did a lot of road tagging that time. The people who were doing the census, they give them hand-hold kit to just tag everything.
Yeah.
Well, we missed the opportunity.
Councillor Waters.
I'm going to say I actually welcome this. I don't drive. I use public transport, and a driverless vehicle is an absolutely superb idea, because at the moment there's loads of issues with the public transport, and National Express excuse is we haven't got the drivers. But if you don't require drivers, you are not going to be able to use that. And a lot of things what happen, I mean, anybody who drives knows this. If there's an incident, accident on the road, it's a case of you drive in and you don't know what happens. Well, if you've got a driverless vehicle, that can actually have the indication come up before you've joined the queue of traffic, and it can actually, it'll be eventually be able to think on its feet and actually avoid that, so it continues its route.
Absolutely.
But the only pitfall I can actually see on it is other driver error. You know, it's other drivers causing accidents and incidents with that vehicle. That's the only thing I can actually say.
I think you're quite right. There's a lot of work to do, and what we'll probably see is autonomous vehicles in particular circumstances first, in particular situations. So you probably wouldn't push an autonomous bus through Birmingham city centre at the moment.
Yeah.
But in time we'll be able to do that, and as the road network develops and as cars develop, it'll be safer for those vehicles to run. But safety is paramount, so we'll make sure that whatever we do is done safely.
Councillor Sims.
Well, it's just a quick one, bit of a mad one. So in these cars, obviously they're all digital. Will there be any manual facility there in case anything does go wrong, that it can be switched over from digital to manual?
So where we're talking about public transport vehicles, remote monitoring and remote control is really key. So some of the projects we're looking at next is the remote control of those vehicles. So there won't be anybody in the vehicle, there will be somebody remotely that can take control of that vehicle and do something if they need to. At the moment, the Solihull Shuttle has a supervisor, which the law requires. The next stage that the law will allow is that we have that supervised remotely, and then ultimately you don't need a supervisor in the long term, which is the way the law's going. But we're going to do this step by step. So we're going to take the time to get that right. But I think you'll probably always, for public transport, have some sort of supervision and some sort of remote control to make sure that it's safe.
Thank you.
Councillor Long.
Thank you briefly. I think the good when we got the rolled out to public transport, these are automated vehicles, right? Councillor Sims said, and Councillor Waters, I think that at the moment the biggest extent we got in public transport is at least for not having a reliability, is not having enough drivers, or the cost of having drivers and the fuel at the moment. So if at least if there is no need for drivers, then obviously that makes it cheaper for the commercial operator to run the transport, and they can be more reliable and they can run more frequently. They have 24-hour transport. The other thing my concern is, like everything else new, is people's perception. So how soon we can start educating people, raising awareness about the automated vehicles? Because if we don't do it now, we're going to end up with people having some myths, like with this vaccine thing. So at some point, we need to get the people, get the right messages to the people to get them trust these vehicles.
Yeah, I think there's the three parts to your question. I think for me, one is the technology isn't here today, which is why we're doing these projects. So we're talking a couple of years before you seriously consider using it as a public transport service vehicle. Secondly, we are educating people because we think it's really important. So through these projects, we're starting to put it in front of people. We're starting to get them to talk about it. We're starting to understand it. The third thing is actually back to Carl's original paper, is the business case needs to stack up for these as well. So at the end of the day, and we haven't done that work yet because the technology is still developing. So a big part of what we'll do over the next 2 to 3 years is say, what's the business case for one of these things being a proper passenger service? And then that will go through the full process. But yeah, public perception, we need to make sure the public are happy.
Thank you. Very last point then, because we do need to move on.
In some countries, there is a live test going on for the automated vehicle, some lorries and stuff. Do we have any like a link with them to learn from their experience, what they learn?
We do. So we're part of a UK connected automotive mobility community. So there's a series of test beds and tests around the UK that we're part of. We're linked in through the Department for Transport to a number of European projects as well. It is worth saying as well, there are actual ruck tests going on these days on the roads in the West Midlands. So the law is allowing for self-driving vehicles to be tested, and they are being tested in the West Midlands.
Thank you. I mean, I think just the last comment from myself on that is really around the I suppose the fragility of the market. You know, I'm presuming you've been alluding to Westfield.
Yes.
Yeah. So, you know, in such a new and emerging market, it's really sad that one of the leaders in that field went under. So, you know, I think it's just a comment around how are we going to ensure that the market is buoyant enough to sustain and to actually, where we've got companies with real technology, skills, innovation, how do we ensure that the funding is there for them to make sure that they can continue this? Because Westfield is a big loss. It's a big loss to us locally.
Absolutely agree. And I think the reason we're bidding in for these projects, that all consortiums, so some of the other shuttle manufacturers in the West Midlands are part of those consortiums with us, so we want them to win that business. We do need to influence government because sometimes the funding is quite hard for the private sector, so they sometimes need to stump up 50% of their own costs. But this technology is still very new and very unproven. So, but we're working really hard with CCAVA, with the government organisation, looking after the money, and we're letting them know what we think.
Hopefully we'll see an improvement in that then. Okay, thank you very much indeed, and progress is noted.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
So that brings us to the final paper and the TDM programme update. And we've got Colin Whitehouse on Teams, who's going to present to us. So over to you, Colin.
Yeah, good morning all, and apologies for not being there. I'll just share my presentation, just one moment. So you can, that's now on your screen. Okay. So yeah, I'm here today to give you an update and basically to give you an overview of where we were and where we're going in regards to travel demand management within TFWM. So yes, so I'm going to give you a bit of an overview of where the background is and where we started from, and one of the key packages that we worked on in the West Midlands, and how we're now changing and transforming going forward as part of the learnings from the Commonwealth Games, and also through some of projects that have gone in the background alongside the reimagining of TFWM. So from the background, obviously what we have is the congestion management plan, which highlighted that congestion is built on 3 core areas, one of which is demand management, which is where this team sits, and it states that TFWM demand management approach will recognise that customers can make intelligent decisions when given the right information, and that's the process that we go through to ensure that any travel demand management strategy that we put out through a communications thing does meet the right criteria. It introduced what's called the 4Rs, and so it's about rerouting, retiming, remode, and remove. Now, each of these 4 cores are all quite key as to how we put together our strategies. So it's around whether you want people to reroute, aka introduction of journey planners to show which way to go to, signposting people to our web pages and advising them on disruptions, and again just giving advice. We're asking people to retime, so it's around people talking to businesses about whether people can work different shift patterns, work different things to avoid the times of disruption. And also we have about remodes, one of the key things about trying to push people to all the modes of transport that's available within the West Midlands if something is not working well. So again, it's trying to ultimately to remove sort of the car usage in these areas as and when needed. So one of the key projects that started early on in this field was around the Perry-Barr mitigation package. So TFWM worked very closely with Birmingham City Council's officers to provide a coordinated approach across all their regeneration scheme, and this involved the scheme which involved the demolition of the flyover on the Perry-Barr, the introduction of the new Perry-Barr train station, the Perry-Barr interchange bus station, and also the A34 sprint works. So in the build up to the works being done, obviously prior to the games, what we did, we worked very closely with all the partners, and we created a very cohesive structure of meetings where we could help inform. One of those group meetings was predominantly around travel demand management and communication, and again it led back to the rerouting, retiming, and remoding, and obviously removing and reducing things. So as part of this package, what did we actually do from a TDM perspective to help mitigate against the potential disruptions that was going to be about all the major works that were going on through this regeneration packaging? So what did we do with the things? So what we did, well, obviously the TDM team with comms, we held really some joint webinars with key businesses, educations along the corridor, along the route, where again we advised on when disruptions were going to be, the key timescales of when things were going to happen. For instance, the timescale when we're expecting major disruption, when the flyover was demolished, for instance, or when we had major works on the Birchfield Island. So again, the team went to and talked to all the local businesses and all the major trip attractors in this area, and to go them through the meeting. And we constantly updated them through travel advice, further webinars, and one-to-one discussions with each of the stakeholders. We provided a toolkit which helped, which was distributed to across a number of people, a number of businesses, and it was really shown that it was a real positive work, and that we actually kept the members of the public and the stakeholders in the area fully averse. But it was a very iterative process going through, and it was very well represented. And as you can say, I think the outcome of it was that I think we had a very positive response from everybody for being well informed. Obviously, we introduced, as you can see on the screen, our branding, which is now being used across the region on all disruptions going through the network. This yellow and purple branding. So going forward, so one of the key things in going forward is that whilst the Perry-Barr works were in place, we had a project called Live Labs was going on, and one of the Live Lab projects key elements was around personas and user segmentation. Now, these personas we think are key to our success and how we can engage with our stakeholders, particularly the public, to help us inform better TDM strategies. Now, what the personas are, as I think, is there are 12 different characteristics within the West Midlands region, of which are shown here. So you've got a carefree affluence, you've got a comfort in the community, for instance, and you've got people who are striving to get along. Now, these are all based on real life people. Our behaviour human analyst team went out and did face-to-face interviews with these people to understand their characteristics and what's their percentage of change, what their financial position is, how they key to travel. And this is all very good about learning their patterns about travel behaviour. It was also then been through this process, we've also then mapped it across the whole of the West Midlands. So we know in the areas of West Midlands where each of these personas are located in their average level. So obviously they'll probably have every aspect of these personas in all of the West Midlands, but these are the key areas. So when we have an area of disruption, an area of thing, we know what the characteristic of the highest percentage of characteristics of the people in that area. Therefore, we can aim and target the strategies appropriately, so that we know that we can hopefully improve that travel behaviour through that that position of disruption. So this, for us, from that Live Labs project, is a very key and fundamental way now we are now modifying and developing the way we do our TDM strategies. We've also started to become more proactive within the team. So what we're doing now is, particularly as we are aware, we had the unfortunate disruption to the back end of last year twice with Midland Metro. So the team took to it to go, right, we'll take the Midland Metro Line 1 and we will introduce now a more proactive strategy that's there that we can draw on and use should or be, unfortunately, any other future disruptions. So how we are working on this strategy was looking at the existing conditions of the Metro, timelines, average journey times, looking at the local generators and education sites along the corridor, so we can then approach them, talk to them around the disruptions that happened, what they felt were the issues, how can we enhance our communications with them, what do they think went well in terms of what we did with our closures. Obviously, for that closure period, the TDM team were working closely with a tactical group around trying to promote the other uses within the region and keeping people moving while the Metro was down. But again, we're now using the segmentation and persona analysis along the corridor. So we're seeing what kind of people are living next to the Line 1 thing. What will help them change their attitudes to travel? What kind of things can we do? How can we promote things differently? Learning from the lessons learned from the previous closures, we then started coming forward now and using a RAG rating based on the regional transport coordination centres thing. So we've got a red, amber, and green. So then we can align when a scenario is in place what it is, aka if it's for complete closure, it would be a black rating. If it's a partial closure from Wolverhampton to West Bromwich, we'd say it'd be a red. But then we have an action plan depending on each of all the scenarios we're working through. So if we've got sort of a partial closure, a full closure, or whatever, we're going through now an action plan to understand what the TDM strategy, what the communication strategy will be as and when something of a similar nature happens again. So this time, rather than being reactive, we're able to be proactive. We're on the ball. We know who to contact, who are our key stakeholders in that particular area where things are happening. So we're pulling this strategy together, and at this moment in time, it's getting almost to a final state where we will then discuss it with our local authority partners. We're at the stage where we're about to engage across the wider teams within TFWM. Around how that interacts with all the other users, so our cycling walking team, with our TFWM bus team. But this strategy now, rather than being a reactive, will actually be proactive going forward. So that's something that we born from learning from our works on the closures of the Metro and how we can now involve the personas and the user segmentation element of it. And obviously, in that period of time, we also had the Commonwealth Games. And one of the key things here, and again, I understand that you probably want to hear more about Commonwealth Games, but I think at the moment there are a lot of work going on around the monitoring evaluation work. I think until that's completed, I think it would be a little bit premature. But one of the key things that we've drawn from working with the Commonwealth Games TDM team is around this fairly simple but really logical way. So there was 3 stages that the Commonwealth Games TDM team approached. There was to know the process. So the key thing here is around understanding the scale of a challenge. So it's again because of we as a TDM team now will understand when we're having a disruption the wider impacts, and that's around creating where the demand for the challenge will be on the network. So we can analyse using using a lot of all the data that's been pulled together from the games information, looking at baseline journey times in areas, looking at future things, and then creating this core narrative. This core narrative is something that I thought was quite vital for the games, from my involvement in it as a business as usual. It was a very key thing. It's around understanding what are we going to say, what is the message for any disruption going forward. So from that, then we then plan this right message. So again, how do we plan it go forward? When are we going to do the stages up until the key event that we are working on, whether it be a major disruption for a major closure of the M42, for instance, for the new junction in the Birmingham interchange area. So how do we plan to get that TDM messaging out in time? And then it's then getting to the do phase. So when it's in place, how's it going to do? So it's informing our journey planner about disruptions. So when people get live updates from the journey planner about disruptions that are happening, giving the travel advice, changing the messaging adaptive to what's going on the ground going forward. And the key thing here is a single source of truth. So again, it's getting all the partners together to understand what is happening and how we can present that to going forward. So I think it's very simple strategy that we're going to start to apply to our future strategies around the know, the plan, and the do phases. And that's something I thought was a very key thread from the Commonwealth Games sort of area. So that's where we're at and where we're going. So currently we are working very closely with all partners across the West Midlands from a TDM and a communications strategy. So we're working very closely in the East Side Midland Metro extension with Birmingham around the East Side area. So we're working with them on the developments are also in that area. So you've got the Beorma site, and we've got the RS Centre and other works, and how it interacts with the ongoing sprint works in those areas. So we're working with Birmingham on that side. Obviously, we're working in Solihull on HS2 Birmingham interchange, major scheme there. So again, it's a major factor there to bring in a cohesive, solid TDM strategy, so that we can again promote the 4 Rs in that area to help minimise disruption. Working again back into Birmingham with the HS2 as well, around the Curzon area, Saltby Viaduct that's planning for in the next 12 to 18 months time. So, and again, we're working with Dudley, we've worked with M6 Junction 10, and again, I think what we're trying to say here is we are working very closely with all our local authority partners in promoting this travel demand management programme, and clearly going forward we will get heavily involved within the active travel projects, the City Regions Sustainable Transport settlement works, and also the BSIP work. So there's any work where there's a major project going on, the TDM team will hopefully be there supporting alongside other programme mitigation works to try and minimise disruption on the network. So that concludes what I've got to say today.
Thank you, Colin. Can I just ask colleagues that when you've got any questions of Colin, that anything relating to the delivery or questions around the Commonwealth Games you reserve for the November meeting, because we have got a specific update on Commonwealth Games, on lessons learned, and you'll have a lot more information in order to, for your questions and then for the respected answers. So I've had Councillor Waters indicate she'd like to ask the question.
Right, Pennybar Junction. I myself do not think it has been an improvement. I have sat during peak time for 20 minutes waiting for the bus to actually move, right? Yesterday, the bus that I actually always catch to get here, I wasn't coming here yesterday, but I got the map up, and there was 3 of the bus that I catch all in a row. Now, take in mind, that bus is every 30 minutes, but there was 3 of them in a row. Now, I know that is not totally down to yourselves, this road structure. It's down to National Express. If the bus is running late, what they should actually do is send the bus through, not in service, to pick up the route. You don't need 3 in a row to actually, what's the name? Could this possibly be, I know they haven't actually finished this junction yet, could this possibly be due to the work that's still going on, and that is why there's still issues on this junction?
Quite possibly. I think obviously with all major junctions, particularly with new traffic signals, there is some bedding time, and obviously BCC are continuing to monitor that junction. And saying there is still some sort of minor works going on, so that probably still is causing problems. So we're not completely clear from Perry Bar. There are some works going on that hopefully we understand will be completed by the end of the year. So yeah, that could well be the issue, that the signals are being monitored and reviewed to ensure they are actually operating as they said. But as you say, that's something that Birmingham are doing, not as us for the TDM thing. But yes, from my traffic engineering experience and doing signals, that's how we do it. There is a bedding period, so that could well be the problem. Yes.
Councillor McCarthy.
Right, you'll work with the HS2 link for Birmingham International. I gather that the capability to link with any future Midland Metro that goes out that way is still included in the design and the implementation. Are you still working on that as a concept?
So I'll pick that up for you.
Thank you, Anne. Yeah.
That's not Colin's area of work, but of course we're now working against part of the devolution Trailblazer deal as well. What is the corridor for North Solihull, East Birmingham, and what is the transport solution there as well. So Carl, who was here earlier, has left now, has already been doing some work along with Solihull and Birmingham colleagues to look at what the transport solution is for that connectivity, including Metro as an option. So you heard Carl say earlier, he's not bothered about what kind of mode it is. It's got to be what is fits within the business case. But what we do need to make sure happens is we reserve the passive provision for the future transport connectivity through those works at HS2, Arden Cross, and all of those things as well. So that passive provision for the space for whatever that transport solution is, including the option of a metro, is what we're working on. And that work is now progressing through the devolution work as well. And obviously part of UK Central ongoing stuff that's happening in Solihull.
Thank you.
Question, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. My question is on your 4 hours. One thing is you mentioned is remote. I'm just checking that if say like A46 work is going on and it's going to be congestion, do you do any additional service like the bus service or some other form of transport? You give option to people. Is that a part of your strategy to do that?
We don't add extra services to things, but we do speak and deal with National Express on what their provision is, and if there is anything they can enhance. Like we did actually, as part of, like I say, the full closure of the metro, we did bring in some obviously additional services as and when. But yeah, that's one of the strategies to pick up, is whether we can, as part of a mitigation package, whether we do need to enhance or increase services of an nature. Yes, that is one of the things we consider what we need to do if need be, and how that's provided. Yes.
It's on a case-by-case basis. There's some locations where you've got higher frequency bus routes. It's easier, and like the A46, low frequency. It's what can you work with the operator? What are they willing to do in terms of increasing capacity for transport?
I'm just digging if there is something you do differently than say somebody else doing it. So how you're totally different from say Manchester or Nottingham. Say how you deal with these things. It's similar.
Yeah. I would say we're slightly different. Would you agree, Colin? The concept of introducing a demand management programme alongside the Regional Transport Coordination Centre, where we're working very closely with other operators and other transport authorities, including local authorities, as high authorities as well, is we bring all of those people together to look at what's the best solution for this piece of work that's going on that's likely to disrupt the networks. And we don't just look at it as the disruption on the road network. What is the opportunity for us to bring in the use of trains and buses and trams and bikes or walking for more local journeys as well. And I think we sort of applied that as a principle within TFWM. Normally, I suppose the concept came out of the Olympics back in 2012, but we've mainstreamed it as part of our business as usual stuff, and that's what Colin does, but slightly different to what the other authorities around the country are doing. They're coming to us to learn about what we're doing and going back and starting to implement some of these same ideas as well, because there's limited network space, limited capacity, So it's not just for disruptions, actually you can use it more generally, also to support behaviour change to more sustainable travel as well.
Thank you. That's why I was trying to find out that if you are, it appears that you are concentrating more on coordination of different things.
Yeah, and we are working with National Highways and DFT as well on our approach. Yeah, so yeah, as Anne said, people are coming to us for some advice. Yeah, so we are, I would say, leading in some of the aspects of it. Yes. Yeah.
Is it more of a convening and enabling management plan, would you say?
I would say it's a bit of both. We do enable things through. I mean, we did secure funding through the Peri-Bar mitigation to be able to put physical measures on the ground as well to help the TDM. So it's not just around promotion of sort of communication, that which is vital to it, but we do provide some physical things on the ground to improve journey times, like enhancing the signals on the A34, so that they can talk better together and things. So it's not just a communication package with enhancing. It works best, as we see on Peri-Bar, with other physical measures as well. So that's where the sort of the TDM team alongside program mitigation team work very closely with partners to try and develop that through mitigation strategies. So they do work dovetail together. So it's a bit of both. It depends on the scale of the impact. Like M6 Junction 10, we predominantly worked with National Highways and Warsaw Council from a communication things, because it was on the SRN and the wider implications probably wasn't so great as the A34 on Peri-Bar. So it was purely more of a communications TDM strategy. But on some of the projects, it goes deeper and becomes enabling. So yeah, I think, as Anne said, it's a case by case process dependent on the project and the level of disruption that may or may not occur as a consequence of the works.
Right, thank you for that. So we just asked to note the progress on the TDM, which I think we have done in terms of the report given. So that leads us on then to the Transport Scrutiny Subcommittee work programme for the rest of the year, and you will see on that we do have indeed the Commonwealth Games lessons learned on the 10th of November. What's my bit of paper? There I am. So you'll note that the next meeting we have the question time portfolio lead member for transport policy on the 13th of October. In preparation for that, we have an hour's workshop which will be on Teams, just so that you can understand from officers the issues around policy and start to formulate questions in readiness for that. Now I understand that it was in the diary for the 30th of September, but I understand, Anne, you're on holiday for that.
I am on holiday, but Mike Waters, if it's around the policy agenda, I think Mike Waters can cover that quite well for you.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. Or I think there's David Harris as well.
David Harris works for Mike Waters. I'd encourage Mike Waters to come down.
Okay, that's lovely.
Sorry, Chair, did you say that one's just on Teams?
That'll be an on Teams one. So it's just it's a workshop just to help you start to think about the questions to pose to Councillor Ward.
What time would that be?
It's 9 o'clock. You should have the invites in your diaries. If not, let me know and I'll resend it to you.
Okay, and you'll also get an invite for those of you who aren't on the Overview and Scrutiny Committee to the mayoral Q&A in December on the budget, because obviously there's the budget is huge for transport, so that can give you the opportunity to sit in on that as well. Okay, don't think there's anything else then I've got to pick up on the future work programme.
Any possibility for consideration of any additions to it?
I would certainly hope so. It's quite a light programme, as you can see at the moment.
Do you want to just email them, say time now, or?
Yeah, if you've got ideas and suggestions, please email them through.
Got a moment just to. One was that we have upcoming work for the main board on mobility hubs, maybe presentation and some questions on that. Another one would be the new rail stations. What's the progress on those? You know, it varies across the West Midlands. The third one would be City STS Regions STS business case, which again comes up before the main board. And possibly the last one, the transport vision going forward, 5 years and 10-year steps.
Okay, thanks for those ideas. And I think what we'll do is we'll take those away, we'll have a look at them and see which bits need to sit within scrutiny versus TDC. Councillor Singh?
Just one idea would be that in Coventry, because we are near to Warwickshire and Leicestershire, some of our basically citizens and children go to study in Leicestershire or vice versa. So the bus pass things work very well within the West Midland. But if they need to go to East Midland or they need to go to Warwickshire, it's really expensive comparative to the West Midland. But it's a huge number of people who use that service. So I've been asking for a while now that is it possible that you can be some flexibility shown with other authorities to say by nearby places where there is a big usage of service across the boundaries, some understanding can be achieved, maintained, or some understanding can be assured that the children at least who want to use the bus service can use with a similar kind of expenses rather than paying through, those. Basically, if I child in Coventry want to go to Birmingham, it's much cheaper than to go to Newton. It's next door.
I think what we certainly looked in the Trailblazer devolution deal discussions around the connectivity with the non-coms and the where you've got where we've got the Met borders and the impact of that. And I think that might be a question. I think that might actually form a question within perhaps the budget Q&A rather than it being a specific presentation, because the financial impact in terms of the budget commitments, I think has to be put to the mayor.
Yeah, I have a lot of feedbacks on this issue, so I'm aware of the financial implication and some people.
But I think it's perfectly legitimate to take that through to the mayor or Q&A.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay.
Vera?
It was mentioned in one meeting that the public transport, the buses, the contracts are up for tender in one meeting, and I can't remember exactly when it was now, but I know it's in one meeting, and I think it'd be interesting to have feedback to what's gone on, which bus services have actually got contracts and how it's actually worked.
Does that come into the bus franchising presentation that we will have on? So we've got that coming in.
We've got it over, yes, right, okay, brilliant.
Coming the 13th
Brilliant.
of January. Karen?
Just a quick question. It was raised by one of my residents a couple of weeks back, actually. They found me up with great concerns because they got on West Midlands travel in West Bromwich to go to the football match, the Hawthorns. So the one guy has got his bus pass anyway, it's fine. He's bought a day saver for his son. He's travelled there. Then as they've gone round the main island by the Hawthorns, just the opposite side, like into near the Hawthorns, the inspectors have got on and checked the bus passes, and they've literally escorted the one off the bus, saying his day saver is not valid. And it was only then that it brought to my attention that island on Junction 1 in West Bromwich is a changeover for bus passes or bus prices.
It's on the boundary.
Yeah, it's just on the boundary. Yeah. I think this should be, I mean, I never knew until a couple of weeks back. Can this be highlighted in some way? Because there's a lot of people who potentially would get fines for.
Is that a TDC issue?
So I think this goes back to the what you were raising about Warwickshire, actually, kids going to Leicester and so on, because it's that changeover. TFWM has a remit for 7 local authority areas, and of course on our periphery it goes into other locations. But that might also be a ticket item, and in the bus franchising, which is in January, is going to specifically talk about that. What this might fall into is the BSIP, the bus service improvement proposals, and the bonfire of bus tickets, taking it down from the thousands that we've got down to 6.
Yeah, good idea.
And it probably fits into that category. Yeah. But that's probably an isolated case, and I'm quite happy to take that offline and deal with that as
when
a
we're
case.
sort of talking about the scrutiny element, I think we have to sort of look at it in the bigger round, don't we? So I'm
Yeah,
guessing
so the
nothing
bus
but-
service improvement plan stuff is a TDC, it's going through TDC. It will also go through the Combined Authority Board, so you might want to review whether or not those things, how they're being managed appropriately and applied as part of that.
I'm just going to type very quickly, very quickly.
It's going to be very
Shannon,
quickly.
and then we're gonna-
Yesterday in Wolverhampton, there was a lady standing at the bus stop outside my shop. She got on the bus and she was refused by the driver to be able to get onto the bus. The problem was she bought a ticket in Dudley and it didn't cover Wolverhampton, so we refused to let her get onto the bus. So it's not isolated. That was a driver error because she asked for a day saver to go to Wolverhampton. So there is an issue there.
So I think, yeah, it's quite right that we perhaps pick that up in through TDC. Yeah. Shannon?
Thank you. Yeah, I found this really strange, what Karen's saying, that somebody lived over 50 years in the Birmingham city, that's part of the north of Birmingham. As far as I know, historically, the boundary between Sandwell and Birmingham is before this Elvin ground. So to hear that to have a roundabout as a cut-off point, it's not. I mean, it's not. It's something wrong here. Really, it is city when the central boundary comes up to Middlemore Road, just around there, right? So really, to have a new arbitrary boundary on the motorway island is wrong. When the Sandwell is really further down it's well past the Elvin ground.
That's what was said, yeah.
But again, I think I would see that as a TDC issue because it's about the delivery aspect. So I think if we can have that fed through to TDC for them to consider. Yeah.
No, I mean, if you got, I know we got journal tab ticking and understand that, but surely journal thing need to take account of the boundaries between the authorities.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that's why I think it needs to be picked up through the TDC because they're
It's more to do with the price structures of the tickets from the operators, and that's something that bus service improvement plan is looking to address by taking the thousands of bus tickets that are available and taking it down to 6.
We would benefit from a BSIP.
I'll work with you.
Yeah. Okay, thank you ever so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks for your attendance and your input today.
Thank you.
I've got a question for you, Councillor Brown.
Yes.
Just let me talk to